Hello everyone, my name is Molly Cross-Blanchard and I'm the Indigenous Curator for Word Vancouver 2021. Thank you for tuning in to this very special and thought-provoking reading, It's Always Been Personal, Creative Writing in Politics, featuring guests Jas M, Brandi Morin, and Emily Riddle. These are three truly brilliant Indigenous writers and thinkers, and I'm so grateful to them for taking the time. A little about me. I'm a white and Métis writer born on Treaty 3 in Fort Frances, Ontario, raised on Treaty 6 in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, and currently living on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples, which is where I am now recording this introduction. I've lived as an uninvited guest on this territory for 4 years now, and I find something new to love about it every day. The mountains, which are a short drive from where I live, the forests, where I've spent hours walking and thinking, and now particularly when we're in the midst of a heat wave that is wreaking havoc on the lower mainland and across Turtle Island, I'm grateful for the breeze off the ocean. I'm also grateful to the stewards of this place, the people who have called this territory home for thousands of years before the roads were laid and the trees were torn up and the skyscrapers were erected. I'm grateful for the people whose ancestors cared for this land and who now have to experience the symptoms of the climate crisis here. This reading today was originally meant to be a live event broadcast on Zoom in celebration of Indigenous Peoples Day. But as we approached June 21st, the atmosphere in the news and within circles of communication between Indigenous people was heavy. The celebration would be diminished by the horrific confirmation of unmarked graves at residential schools across Turtle Island. We felt it wasn't appropriate to ask our readers to conduct a live event that day, particularly considering the sensitive nature of our topic. Instead, we're sharing this pre-recorded reading on what is colonially known as Canada Day. I hope that in hearing what our readers have to say, you'll think critically about how you'll be marking this day and every July 1st moving forward. Before I introduce each of our readers, Word Vancouver would like to take a moment to thank our generous donors and sponsors: the Canada Council for the Arts, Canada Periodical Fund, Heritage Canada, the BC Arts Council, Creative BC, BC Gaming, the City of Vancouver, Downtown Vancouver Business Improvement Association, Vancouver Public Library, Asian Canadian Writers Workshop, Children's Writers and Illustrators of BC, and so many more. Without you, this free festival could not happen. Our first reader will be Jas M. Morgan. Jas is a Toronto-based Cree Métis Saulteaux Shirk Doctoral Scholarship recipient, a McGill University Art History PhD candidate, and an assistant professor in Ryerson University's Department of English. They previously held the position of Editor-at-Large for Canadian Art and served as the Arts and Literary Summit Programmer for Magnet 2019. Morgan's first book, Nitisanak, published by Metonymy Press in 2018, won the prestigious 2019 Dane Ogilvie Prize and a 2019 Quebec Writers Federation First Book Prize. It was also nominated for a Lambda Literary Award and an Indigenous Voices Literary Award. Jas is a Reveal Indigenous Art Award recipient and have been awarded National Magazine Awards in the essay category for Stories Not Told and in the Best Editorial Package category for Me Too and the Secrets Indigenous Women Keep. Morgan's writing has appeared in The Walrus, The Malahat Review, Room, Guts, Essay, Teen Vogue, CV2 and Prairie Fire, The New Inquiry, and other publications. The second reader will be Brandi Morin. Brandi is an award-winning French Cree Iroquois journalist from Treaty 6, Alberta, near Edmonton. Her most notable work is published or broadcasted with Al Jazeera English, The Guardian, The National Observer, The Toronto Star, Power and Politics, CTV National, CBC Newsnet, The New York Times, HuffPost Canada, Elle Canada, Vice Canada, The Walrus, Aboriginal Peoples Television Network National News, and CBC Indigenous. Brandi won a Human Rights Reporting Award from the Canadian Association of Journalists in April of 2019 for her work with the CBC's Beyond 94 project, tracking the progress of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action. Her debut memoir, A Woman of Gold, is forthcoming with House of Anansi in 2022. And the final reader for this event will be Emily Riddle. Emily is a Nahio and a member of the Alexander First Nation in Treaty 6. She lives in Amiskawasi, I'm going to get this right, Amiskawasi, Waskiagan. A writer, public library worker, and researcher, she sits on the board of advisors for the Yellowhead Institute, a First Nations-led think tank. Emily was shortlisted for the 2020 CBC Poetry Prize and selected for the 2021 Writers' Trust of Canada Mentorship Program. She was also a recipient of the Silver Award for Poetry at the 2021 National Magazine Awards and received a Gold Award in the Issue Grand Prix category for her work as a co-editor on the land back issue of Briar Patch magazine. Her first chapbook is forthcoming with Moon Jelly House. Please keep in mind that some of the content in these readings may be triggering to you, especially considering the recent and continuous re-traumatizing of Indigenous peoples. And now I welcome Jas M. Morgan.
Hello, my name is Jas M. Morgan. I'm happy to be here with you today, providing a reading. The first reading that I will be giving is the first chapter from my book, Nitisanak, published by Metonymy Press. I've read this reading a lot in public reading, so I tend not to read it as much anymore. But with everything happening in the world today, regarding the excavated bodies of babies being found at the sites of abandoned and closed residential schools in the prairies, it felt pertinent to read this chapter because it does discuss some of the legacies of residential schools in our families today. So this chapter is called Love Story Medicine, and the subtitle is Indian Love. If we were to trust popular and scholarly representations of Native people, we would have to conclude that they, unlike any other peoples in the world, are without love. And or do you believe in life after Indian love? And the first quote is an Audra Simpson quote, and the second quote is a shared quote. Is there really such a thing as Indian love, as trauma baby love, as love for the unloved? Or is Indian love just a tall tale I heard Kenny G and Dolly Parton sing about on the radio in my grandpa's truck, one dry, hot prairie summer afternoon? Sipping the warm pop and eating the old Dutch ripple chips he let me get at an isolated gas station a few towns over while he worked in his garage. Islands in the stream, that is what we are. It's probably just that prairie Indian thing, though. If love seems unattainable for us prairie Indians, it's only because we've lost our sacred connection to the land and to all creation. We've lost our ability to speak and be spoken to by animals. We've lost the intimacy of being. If love seems impossible for me and my Plains Indian kin, it's only because they came into our homes in the middle of the night and stole our babies from their beds. They shackled them in tiny handcuffs and sent them miles and miles away where they were put into prisons, alone, frightened, hungry, and cold. Some of them never made it home. Some of them died trying. The ones who did come back no longer knew tenderness, recoiling at its touch, and passed the static onto the war-torn nerves of my generation. If love seems hard on the open prairie for me and my Nichis, it's probably because this world hardened us. Out there, amidst the scarcity feels, we learned that scarcity and depressive affect were the norm, and tenderness and care were not. Someone tricked us, told us that we are competition and not siblings, that individual voices weaken other individual voices instead of that our collective voices hold a power that can destabilize nations of white men. If love seems hard for us Plains Indians, it's because they stole the words out of our mouths, the ones that describe our relationships to one another through action-based intentions rather than name and claim with nouns. Colonial capitalism infected our sacred words. If love seems hard, it's because love is heartbreaking for people like us prairie Indians. Cynicism and paranoia have made their way into our hearts, begun to fester and eat away at the spirit. Cynicism that manifests as knowledge that the world is a stage wherein we are only allowed to play out our suffering. Because what is settler colonialism if not one giant trigger for Black, Indigenous, and displaced peoples? And the ultimate gaslight, too. And the fact that it's always followed by the paranoia that survivance and resilience are just another way to keep us down. True. And ergo, we will always be down and out of love. But I know that to love still, without pretension, without fear of overt romanticism, and despite that it is hard, well, that's our power, ain't it? It's at our most essential, we still got that love and that do it for the city prairie Indian vibe nation. To love as delicately as we burn sage, to love as ceremony, to love hard, well, that's where our dominion lies. So thank you for your patience with my dogs running in and out of the shot and all my at-home sounds. It's just the sort of COVIDian realities that we're all contending with, working from home. So the second and final reading I want to do today is called Vision 8, Pipichu. And I want to read this one because in instances where I have to talk about the naturalization of Indigenous death in the prairies, I also always want to make space for just gay love in the prairies too, because I'm corny like that. 1. That fucking hair of hers. It always creeps up on me, golden and smelling of jasmine, glinting in the sun at dawn when I did acid and it started raining. When the drugs kicked in, her and that fucking hair. 2. I smoke as ceremony and smoked long before I knew what ceremony was, cheap res cigarettes. I smoke, much unlike the good Indians who lay down only the best tobacco, more nativer than you. I smoke smokes that you buy on the side of the highway sold in plastic bags. Buy 100s for $10 a bag. I smoke the same res cigarettes for months and store them in my freezer to keep because I'm poor as hell like that. I smoke to pull that sweet tobacco into my lungs and feel it cleanse me the way city Indians like a fucking meteor. I smoke when the sadness seeps into the bones, when it settles in and makes a home, like a lonely prairie wind. I smoke to distract myself from my feelings, another disassociative coping mechanism. Fuck bad coping mechanisms. I smoke when I start having visions of her, crying and blubbering to someone, another cliche first love story. I smoke and say, I had planned to take her away, I could have made it work, so why didn't you? I smoke and watch the sunrise sitting among my self-pity and doubt out there in the rain. 3. Reprieve or obsession, that fucking hair. It will come to you in dreams, sitting on rocks out in the ocean. You could only see that fucking hair, never her face. There are a few things I regret more than the love that I wasn't ready to give. Thank you.
2 weeks ago, I stopped in Kamloops, BC on my way to Vancouver Island to cover an assignment. Just days before, the Tk'emlúps First Nation shared the stunning revelation that 215 remains of children who attended the former residential school there had been found. The discovery was dominating headlines and made international news, damning Canada for its heinous sins. Public outpours of anger, disbelief, and solidarity to residential school survivors were widespread. For many survivors, it felt like suddenly having a Band-Aid on a festering wound ripped off. The grief was thick. I felt it lingering in the air when I drove toward the former red brick institution on the reserve in Kamloops. There were rows of hundreds of vehicles backed up along the highway to get into the school, and streams of people walking to and from the children's shrine to pay their respects. Taking slow, deep breaths as I trekked to the site so the weight of the tragedy didn't knock me out, I witnessed an inspiring scene. Families of all colors, creeds, and backgrounds were gathered to honor these lost babies. White parents stood crying next to their children. They were showing their children the graves of the Indigenous kids and lamenting their deaths. Survivors traced the plaque bearing the names of some of the victims and thanked everyone who came. "Finally, you see us. Finally, you believe us," one lone survivor shouted over the crowd, which went dead silent. "We can never forget. This was a horrible place. I thank you for being here. Please, always remember the ones who didn't make it." In the distance, traditional singers sang songs of mourning to the beat of soaring drums. Drums and songs that were once banned, Indigenous languages forbidden, were being revived over the graves of the babies who didn't survive a genocidal agenda of a colonialism and assimilation. Gatherings in the thousands like this unfolded across the country. Horror, shock, reflection, and troubling questions about the truth of our past stalked most of our hearts and minds. As the days faded into weeks, so did the headlines and the vigils. More graves of Indigenous children are being discovered, and there will be thousands more. But it will take more than a moment of silence, more than a passionate social media post or retweet, more than wearing an orange shirt in solidarity to get through. We can't let this pass by and keep living the complacency of the status quo. The status quo was denial, apathy, and perpetuating violence. The mistreatment of Indigenous peoples in this country is ongoing. It's not ancient history like some like to tout as an excuse to absolve themselves from responsibility. Indigenous peoples have been living in survival mode since European contact. Survival from oppression of the colonial agenda against our lives that plays out in stripping of rights, intergenerational trauma, poverty, suicides, missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and countless human rights abuses. The Truth and Reconciliation Commissioners petitioned the federal government to fund an investigation into the deaths of children in residential schools 6 years ago. They were denied. But the truth surfaced anyway, and Canada acted shocked. We have to let this discovery hit hard, to sink in and peel back the layers of protection. It's tough to face this evil. It's time for truth and reckoning. Whether we feel ready or not, it's the way forward and the way to never forget, to honor these children, to stop the continued oppression, and never let it happen again. Brandi Morin, column for the Toronto Star.
How Nioto Timothy Kiatanis Gitinawa Kakio Emily Riddle Nitisigas and Kaputagao Otsenia Maga Ni Wigan Amasko Watsiwaska Iganik Megwats Kisasteo Wyoitamik Mr. Hey. So hello, my name is Emily Riddle. I am Nehio on my mom's side from the Alexander First Nation, and Scottish and Scandinavian on my dad's side. I live right now in Edmonton, which we call Amasko-Watsiwaskagan, so in Treaty 6 territory, and I'm coming to you from the neighborhood now known as Oliver, but not for too much longer. So before I read the 4 poems that I picked for this event that I'm very grateful to be part of, I just wanted to acknowledge that the way in which I picked them is definitely related to the overall grief that we're feeling as Indigenous people living in a settler colonial country and continuing to live through genocidal practices that Canada is still enacting on us. So this first poem that I wrote, called Holy Beings, was one that I wrote on the day that there was an announcement from the chief of Ka'awasis or Kawasis in Treaty 4 territory in relation to the unmarked graves, the 751 unmarked graves at their former residential school on their reserve. Holy Beings. On the day the chief of Ka'awasis announces they have confirmed 751 bodies in unmarked graves outside the residential school in their community, I Google things like, when will the sun run out of fuel? How many Nehiyawewan speakers are there in Saskatchewan? How many years until climate change is irreversible? Next week, Jason Kenney is fully opening the province for July 1st, so I call a bakery and ask them to write "Fuck Canada" on a $50 cake and book myself a massage covered by my city health benefits. The matriarchal line of my family tree reads like prairie bourgeois, smallpox, residential school, day school, 60 scoop, middle class. I wear an orange shirt to work as some kind of balm for my being, but I've sat in the sun enough this summer that I get sympathetic looks from settlers that walk by me. They are less able to avoid the reality they maintain. The thing is, I don't want your pity. The thing is, I can see right through your face, and I know the difference between white guilt and you pitying me for being a prairie Indian. The other thing is, I am so fucking blessed to be born who I am, and I want every urban Nehiyaw baby to feel that too, to know that they are holy beings, walking on land full of prayers for their well-being. And it is not their fault they don't know that. We will help them remember, in the name of those we remain to forget. So this next poem is called Icy Futures, and it's another one of my newer poems that I've written recently. And it's definitely related to what it is like in Western Canada this week. So I'm filming this right now, and it's about 40 degrees in Edmonton, which is very unusual for June. And it's definitely a sign of the climate change future that is hurling towards us. So Icy Futures. Rivers like when you know their real names, it's only polite. The Northern Pike laugh when you say Saskatchewan, but appreciate the effort. Of the girls living on the banks. As kids, my parents drove my sister and I up to the Columbia ice fields, told us to fill a water bottle straight from the source, showed us the signposts of the receding hairline of ice. I can't bring myself to visit now, to face the glacial melting. In the treaty negotiations, we told them this agreement was to last as long as the rivers flow, that the mountains were too sacred to be included in this treaty, as was the water, obviously. We have been warned. The glaciers that feed the arteries of our territories will vanish one day, and then what will happen? I used to panic about this particular clause. I still panic thinking about our rivers no longer flowing. I was full of despair the summer the TMX pipeline was quietly doubled underneath it, while another plague hit the people, who live along one of the rowdiest parts of the river. There was a small comfort to be savored when I was told the river's flowing references the fluid of Nehiyaw who give birth. That sisters drinking glacial water surrounded by tourists with their mom, who would cut a bitch if anyone tried to steal them, as she was, is just as much the flow as the droplets from the mountains. This is another one of my newer poems that potentially is not done, but I will share it. And it was written on in reaction to Prince Philip's death, and thinking about being a treaty partner. So it's called How to Overthrow the Canadian State via Infographic. Prince Philip died, and I wish I could celebrate, but my teachings don't allow me to find joy in the death of an old man. The Treaty 6 Confederacy sends condolences to the Queen on the passing of her husband. I eat a pint of ice cream with the acknowledgement that I will never live to be 99. White people seem nearly immortal while my Indian friend group regularly faces death of our peers. The Queen sends my chief a pastel pantsuit that matches one of hers. He is supposed to receive a new outfit every 3 years as per treaty. Inside the package, a letter reads, "I'm sorry, I can't do it, don't hate me." This is a Sex and the City reference, which has a footnote in the actual poem. So if you were old enough to have watched Sex and the City and remember Carrie dating Burger, then that is a reference for you. And my last poem I wanted to leave on a more hopeful note, because things feel very apocalyptic this week. And this is a poem that I wrote in reaction to Billy Ray Belcourt's poem Cree Girl Explodes the Necropolis of Ottawa, and it's called Cree Girl Explodes the Political Project Called Alberta. I stared at the sandstone dome of the Alberta legislature so long that it started to disintegrate. It seemed to be doing that on its own, how this temple of democracy was covered in tarps, always during maintenance. But this time, the sedimentary grandfathers, squished into this symbol of occupation, were fully revolting. The beavers were alerted from their metropolis to the west and filed in to dismantle the wooden furniture and fixtures. They spared the Kwagil totem pole on the grounds and called upon horse relatives to carry it back to the west coast. The nearby magpies giggled to themselves, feasting on the snacks of overpaid political staffers. Once the building had returned to the earth, the last iteration of Louise's Fort Edmonton mansion emerged from the lawn Bowling Green. She wrote emails from the dead to each of her descendants. None of us questioned this because our ancestors had powers beyond emails. We had learned that the only way to survive climate upheaval was to accept the non-linearity of time and realms. We had not figured out how to communicate across these borders, but opening ourselves to it was half the battle. All of Louise's descendants, who were single moms, moved into her house and built other houses on the grounds of the non-existent Alberta legislature. There was no chief factor, there was no premier, there were only Gijitao Squawak and those who understood their authority. So thank you for listening to my 4 poems. I sweat, and I hope that you have an excellent July, despite everything.
Thank you so much, Jas, Brandi, and Emily, for taking the time to share your invaluable words with us. It's a difficult time to expend energy on anyone but ourselves, so the gravity of this labor isn't lost on me. Truly, thank you. And thank you to everyone who watched this Word Vancouver event. If you enjoyed the readings and learned something, please consider making a donation to the Residential School Survivor Society, Tiny House Warriors, or the Vancouver Black and Indigenous Self-Care and Healing Fund. Thanks again, and take care.